Hello and welcome back to the Toffee Blues YouTube channel, your source for all things Everton. My name's Thomas, back on the channel today, joined by Paul, the Esk on Twitter. We're going to be discussing the potential Everton takeover, what it might mean for the club, where it's kind of come from, and, well, maybe make some predictions for the future. Paul, thank you very much for coming on today. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. Anybody listening to this, what they don't realise is that this is take 6, because Thomas has screwed it up every time. I'm joking, it's take 2.
Oh, dear me, I think I'm slightly out of practice. Not been on the channel for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, don't worry, it's good stuff. Yeah, I'm good, mate. Really interesting times. I thought the transfer window was going to be all about what we could spend and who we had to sell and this, that, and the other, and it still might be that. But actually, this news sort of transcends all of that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it wasn't really something anyone expected. I think with all the work that the 27 campaign did and the Moshiri statements that we've got, that didn't quite have much substance, but it looked like he was kind of going to hopefully improve the way he run the club. Turns out he might just try and sell it now. So we'll kind of start at the start. It seems like the owner was looking for a bit more investment, which has now kind of developed into takeover talks, and the man leading it is, of course, Peter Kenyon, who has popped up many times. We know is associated with Manchester United and Chelsea. I think he's been behind a couple of consortiums who tried to buy clubs in the past, most notably, I think, Newcastle, more recently, before the Saudi takeover. But what do you understand about the consortium that's coming up? Who might be getting into bed with, and who might be running the club?
Okay, I mean, it is interesting. So this takeover opportunity came about by, there's a number of people who have been trying to introduce people to Fahad Moshiri to help him with his investment program, specifically at the stadium. And somebody that is known to Moshiri introduced Peter Kenyon as a potential funder of the stadium, although it's obviously not Peter Kenyon's money, but it's people that Peter Kenyon represents. And the conversation went from, yeah, I might be able to help you fund the stadium, 350 million pound or whatever, to the people that I represent, to wealthy Americans, might actually be interested in buying the club. And Moshiri, I think surprisingly, took a view that this was worth discussing. So that's exactly what they've done. They've entered an agreement that gives Peter Kenyon, and I'll talk about Peter Kenyon in a minute, exclusivity, and for a period at least, nobody knows how long that period is, but for a period at least, these are the guys who got the opportunity to put a bid together that Moshiri might or might not accept. So quite rightly, you ask, who is Peter Kenyon? I've got a slightly controversial take on Peter Kenyon, which I'll talk about in a second. He's representing 2 Americans, a guy called John Thornton and another guy whose surname is Kaminsky. Now, Kaminsky's the interesting one in terms of funding. He's very wealthy real estate investor, very private, very quiet. We won't see or hear much of him if he was involved, but he's a proper serious businessman who knows the real estate market in the US, and would be making an investment in what they call a sports franchise for the first time if he was to invest in Everton. John Thornton has got a much higher profile, former very senior executive at Goldman Sachs, the huge investment bank. And since leaving Goldman Sachs in the early 2000s, he's done an awful lot of business in China, and he's represented the US government and US companies in China and the Far East, and is famous for most Evertonians for having a photograph taken with Steve Bannon and Nigel, what's his name?
Nigel Farage.
Nigel Farage, yeah, didn't want to use his name there. And there is, I mean, he actually used to support Democrat candidates in the US, but there is some thought that he has sort of right-wing leanings in terms of his political views these days. Other people say, no, that's nonsense. He's just a He's a pragmatist, and because the Trump government needed help with China trade talks, he was actually the most and the best qualified person to represent the US. And that's why those conversations have taken place, and that's why there's been those photos. So they're the two investors that Peter Kenyon represents. Peter Kenyon will be known to most people for his time as CEO of Manchester United in the first instance, and then CEO of Chelsea for a relatively short period of time, just over 3 years. Obviously, both of which were successful in terms of Manchester United's commercial growth, but also he was at Chelsea at a time when the Abramovich takeover was really starting to motor. So that's his background. The controversial bit is that Peter Kenyon is 68, and so I know one can't be ageist these days, but he's not a spring chicken. He's not a young man. And secondly, he's not held a senior executive position in football. He's done consultancy work, and he tries to put deals together. He's not held a senior consultancy role in football since he left Chelsea in 2009. So I said it on my own podcast earlier today. What we don't want to be in is a position where, like we were with Benitez, where obviously very different, but where people are saying this guy's got a great track record in English football, but actually the track record stopped over a decade ago. So I think there is a question mark over that. Peter Kenyon evokes strong reactions from people. People either love him or they hate him. Some people say, he's past it. He just can't do it anymore. You can point to his failures at Newcastle, or rather trying to get the Newcastle takeover sorted. Sunderland also, and a number of other deals which never got over the line. Now that may or may not be his fault. I don't know, because I don't know the details. But it's not crystal clear that if you sort of ask somebody to write down a list of who would you like to be heading the next consortium that's going to buy Everton, or who's going to be the next CEO, or who's going to be the next chairman of Everton Football Club, there wouldn't be many people that would instinctively say Peter Kenyon's your man. So I think that's an interesting one. I think it's a point that's been largely ignored by the media so far, in all the excitement that, hey, Fahad Moshiri wants to sell. Who's he going to sell to? Well, he's going to sell to this guy with a great track record in the past. But the point is that it's in the past, and the point is that he's not done anything in English football significantly for the last 13 years.
It is interesting.
That's my controversial bit.
Yeah. No, I do think it's interesting how he has popped up several times with these consortiums that kind of haven't got over the line at clubs. And as you mentioned, we don't know why that is, but there is clearly question marks over, his importance in the English game. So as you mentioned, he hasn't really, he hasn't had a direct role since Chelsea, really. So it is interesting. But you mentioned there you're not entirely convinced by Peter Kenyon, which I think is fair enough, and people know that. But if this takeover was to happen, I've seen your tweet. I think it was about Thornton, and you mentioned Kaminsky there. These are extremely wise businessmen. They know how to run businesses, and I'm sure people maybe thought that about Moshiri when he came in. That clearly hasn't quite materialised at a football club. But if the takeover was to happen with this consortium that we think it is, do you think the club would be run, well, I don't know, more efficiently, better, just in general?
Well, I don't know Kaminsky at all. Okay, so I'm no different from anybody else in the sense that I've read what's available on the internet, and that's not a huge amount. Thornton definitely is one of those people who dines at the top table, and he dines at the top table because he deserves to be there. He's hard-nosed, highly intelligent, highly motivated, businessman who tends to be successful in most things that he does. He's super well known, super well connected. He's connected at the very highest levels, obviously, of US government, but he's also connected at the very highest levels of Chinese government. And you don't get to those positions without being able to prove your worth to those people. And those people, particularly the Chinese government, in terms of Westerners, are very, very demanding. And the fact that he's right at the very top of that, the fact that he's recognized in China, he's professor of one of the greatest universities, he's a professor at one of the greatest universities in China, in Beijing. The fact that he's acknowledged in Chinese society and with the Chinese government says an awful lot about his abilities. How translatable those abilities are to running a football club, who knows? But in all the times that you and I have spoken, we've often talked about what the club needs is people with a global presence, people with management experience, people who have succeeded, people who know how to grow businesses. He ticks all of those boxes, with stars attached. He is exceptional in each of those categories. So I think there's no doubt at all that if he was involved, if he put his name to it, if he was involved in any sense, that the club would be a significantly different club from what it is now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it sounds like a positive sign, definitely, that we all want the club to be run, more officially on more of a global stage. We want to stop being embarrassed on the global stage, I'd say, by the decisions that we have made over the past few years. And there's been plenty said, as you mentioned at the start, about Thornton's links kind of to the right wing. I don't want to touch on them too much because it's not as if we've been previously backed by the most noble owners. I mean, we know Usmanov's links to Vladimir Putin. We know why USM no longer sponsor the club. So I don't want to touch on that for too long, but kind of noting on the general thing about USM have now departed. It looked like Moshiri definitely needed more funding. He's, as we've spoken about before, he's seen the value of his own portfolio kind of decrease fairly significantly after the outbreak of the war in Ukraine. So do you see this is a very logical time for Moshiri to sell? That, look, it's been I'm not sure if he'd call it a mistake, but it's been a very costly kind of venture that he's made into football. It hasn't really worked out for him. Maybe as he's seen now, with his own worth outside of football decreasing massively as well. If he can get a big lump sum for the club, does it kind of seem like a logical time for Moshiri to sell if we look at it that way?
I think there's two things, Thomas. I think as we've talked about previously, he's painted himself into a corner as far as how he can take the club forward. Because without selling players or without massive new sponsorship from somebody other than USM, we can't defy the laws of profitability and sustainability. So we need either to sell or to bring in new sponsors. Just putting money into the club as an owner is not the solution. We've done that and we've played it and we didn't play it well. So that can't happen anymore. So even if he's got funds to invest in the club over and above what's needed for the stadium, he can't do that effectively without a commercial partner alongside to put that money in. That's the first thing. And then secondly, if we look at his personal circumstances, and again, a lot of it is unknown, but there's a recognition that he's put, I think, close to £800 million into the club, or in buying shares from existing shareholders. That's a significant amount of his net worth, whatever you think his net worth is. But yet he still has to find another maybe 300-400, maybe 500 million over the next couple of years to pay for the stadium, but also to pay for the losses, because the club is going to continue to be loss-making next year and probably the year after. So he's got to find that money from somewhere. So he ends up being in a position where if he doesn't do anything now, he's going to spend maybe 1.1 billion, maybe a bit more, of his own money on Everton Football Club. And what's Everton Football Club going to be worth in 2 years' time? Even if we get the stadium open, it's not going to be anywhere near worth a billion or 1.1 billion, whatever the figure be. So if he sells now, he's going to sell at a loss. That's an absolute. That's a given. I don't think anybody is going to pay him back the amount of money that he already spent. So that's one. But why would he sell at a loss? Well, sometimes investors just have to sell at a loss, and most investors make more losses than they do gains. But when they make gains, they make massive gains, pay for all of the other losses. So it wouldn't be unusual for him to have to sell at a loss. I'm pretty sure at his age, this won't be the first made a loss-making investment. And the second point is that if he sells now, he doesn't have to commit more funds in the future. So he's actually saving himself money by selling now, because he doesn't have to commit to the rest of the expenditure of Bramley Moore and the rest of the expenditure in terms of rebuilding the squad, covering losses, etc., etc. So he's probably going to save himself anywhere between 350 and 500 million by selling now. So if he ends up making anywhere between 300 and 500 million loss, he's still saving himself money, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So
I understand.
From a timing point of view, that probably the timing is absolutely right. And I suspect the other thing is that it ceased to be fun for him. He's not been at games for a long time now. I think the Watford home game was the last game he attended. That gives you an indication of how he feels about it. I'm aware, obviously, that he's got other things to do, and everything that happened in Ukraine and everything that's happened with his USM businesses will have obviously distracted him and taken up much of his time. But nevertheless, it's a long time since he's been to a game, and it's a long time since he's really communicated in a sense that he's getting any enjoyment, or he's forward looking. Even the comments that he made in January, and certainly the letter, the open letter that he made just very recently, the beginning of June, they don't suggest that there's a man who's really enthralled by the prospect of continuing to own Everton. So I don't think it should have come as a surprise that we're in this position. I think the interesting thing is that neither the club nor he have denied that the club is for sale. And in the past, they've been very, very quick to stamp on any media or anybody in social media who suggests something of that nature. They've come out with very strong denials, and they put pressure on the people who've carried the stories or the suggestion of a story to retract those stories. That hasn't happened on this occasion. There's been no denial from Everton Football Club, and there's been no denial from Farhad Moshiri, or indeed Alicia Usmanov's PR people, because Alicia Usmanov's PR people have been actively engaged in managing stories that come to the media. But on this occasion, nobody has denied it. And of course, Peter Kenyon himself has come out and gone public. He first spoke to the Telegraph, but I know through the people that I know in the media that he's also spoken to many, many other media players, and he thinks that this is a serious attempt to buy Everton Football Club, and he thinks that Everton are receptive to the idea of selling the football club to his consortium. So is this real? Yeah, it's absolutely real.
Yeah, and I do find that interesting, and we discussed there obviously that why Moshiri wants to sell at this point, how realistic is it? But I think on the flip side as well, we should look at why would a consortium want to buy Everton Football Club? And I don't mean that in a necessarily negative way, but it's not like the club's been, we haven't looked great in the media for a long time. We've had a lot of problems. The club's made historic losses every year. What do you think the consortium looks at in Everton? We understand that the stadium is going to offer a massive financial boost. We know that for a fact. They clearly see some sort of potential in the club that hasn't been realised by far, Moshiri. And you mentioned the valuation there. We know that the club's not going to be worth 1 billion or 1.5 billion in a few years. But what kind of potential do you think the consortium see here? Because there's been a lot spoken about, their investment in the stadium, their investment in transfers, but that's kind of, the media are obviously going to put that out. Well, first of all, we know that the media is a pretty strong bargaining tool. It's used as part of negotiations, but also that what do fans want to hear? They want to hear about the club's not going to be making massive losses. There's still going to be money for transfers. But before we fully get onto kind of the profitability and sustainability side of it and what it might mean this season, next season for the transfer window, what kind of potential do you think these businessmen see in Everton Football Club? Because we know, as you mentioned before, they are very wise. They know their business. So what do they actually see in a club that has made such massive losses for the past 6, 7, 8 years?
So there's a massive amount of money sloshing around in sort of corporate America at the moment. Notwithstanding the fact that there's high inflation and the global economy might end up in a much more difficult position than it is now as a result of the energy crisis and as a result of what's happening, the illegal invasion of Ukraine. There's a lot of money around. There's an idea that sport belongs in the sort of media and entertainment sector, which always attracts a lot of interest from institutional investors, but also high net worth investors as well. And has over the years proved to be enormously successful investments for people. So the sector's interesting. So there's a lot of interest in the sort of professional sports sector to begin with. And then if you look at the English Premier League specifically, Americans see the English Premier League as being very cheap relative to, so if they want to buy what they call a sports franchise, it's much cheaper to buy an English football club than it is to buy a baseball club or a basketball club or a hockey club. So that's attractive. Then you look at the currency. The American dollar is very strong against the British pound. So that makes English football clubs even cheaper. Then if you look at Everton specifically, well, Everton is still a development opportunity, even if we think that, we screwed it up over the last 6 years. They see, I think most people see Everton, notwithstanding the fact that we nearly got relegated last year, as the one club that's outside the top 6 that is most likely to stay within the Premier League. Now, you could argue that West Ham are in that position. You could argue, several other clubs, Wolves perhaps, are in that position. But none of those are, well, West Ham certainly, whilst they're for sale, they're going in a different direction. They've got an investor that wants to buy Gold and Sullivan out in the future. So they're not attractive to US investors. So Everton, if you went down a list of Premier League clubs outside the top 6, Everton probably still top of that list in terms of, are they an attractive proposition? Well, yes, they are, because notwithstanding last year, they're likely to remain within the Premier League. And I think if you're talking to American investors, you've got to look at what is the Premier League? Well, it's a license to print a certain amount of money every year. As long as you don't get relegated, you're guaranteed sort of, £130 million a year of revenue. And then you can top that up with gate receipts, and you can top it up with commercial revenue if you've got a strong commercial team. So whilst it's not necessarily a license to make profits, it's a license to print money. And you know that money is going to be there year in, year out. And you know that money probably is going to increase every 3 years, which is this, the media rights cycle. So it's very attractive to US investors from that point of view. And then Everton in particular, because we failed to move on from where we were 6 years ago, we're probably seen as being as I say, a development opportunity. So we're probably the most attractive football club outside the top 6. And we're obviously an awful lot cheaper than the top 6. Look at the price that Chelsea just went for, as against the likely price that Everton are going to go for. So I think there's going to be a few vultures and a few wolves circling what they think is a carcass. and that carcass is the Everton Football Club owned by Fahad Moshiri. Excuse me. They're also going to look at Fahad Moshiri's personal circumstances. I think this is a guy that's got to sell. So there's the attraction. How do they make it better? Well, like any other business, they if they buy the business, how do they make it better? Well, they just bring better people in to run it, which is what we've been crying out for the last 6 years and what Moshiri's failed to do. You bring better people in on the business side. You bring better people, or you look at the people you've got on the football side, and it may be now that they think we've got good enough people. It may need adding to, but we're in a better position than we have been at any time in the last 6 years, and the academy now seems to be well stocked with good people as against what it was previously. So yeah, they just view it as a development opportunity, and then on top of that, you've got the stadium, and a lot of American investors love investing in infrastructure. They love investing in real estate, as they call it, because they recognize that over time it appreciates in value, and they recognize that in the case of comparing Bramley Moor to Goodison Park, there's an uplift of 25-30 million pound a year in income. So if it costs you 500 million to increase your income by 25 to 30 million, that's a pretty good investment. And of course, if they wanted to sell at some point in the future, a football club with a brand new shiny stadium sitting on the banks of the River Mersey is much more attractive than a football club with a beautiful but decrepit old ground in L4. So there's an awful lot of reasons why American investors would want to buy Everton Football Club.
I do find it fascinating kind of looking at the parallels between ourselves and Chelsea, purely because, as you mentioned there's a lot of money kind of rolling around in corporate America, and there's a massive, relative departure of kind of Russian influences in kind of Western sport, especially. Look, Abramovich was massive for the Premier League, we know that, but that Chelsea deal, there was much discussed about it, and I think it helps to look at that, because there are more eyes of the world on a sale of Chelsea Football Club than it is of Everton. At the end of the day, there's more to be discussed, and the valuation of the clubs especially was interesting. I think I was reading an Athletic article talking about, look, I mean, 2.5 billion is a ridiculous amount of money, but the point you mentioned there, that these American investors look for a sports franchise, and for some reason, I don't know the exact reason. I'm sure you do, or someone else says, look, English football teams are cheaper to buy than American franchises, despite the massive potential that we know that owning a Premier League club has financially. And I think it will be interesting to kind of draw similarities between the two, and that might help, because we will only hear so much about the deal. And if this consortium does fall through again, it'll be interesting to see if kind of any other investors come through. And I don't want to dwell on them for too long, because we don't have too long left. But kind of just my last kind of questions.
Well, just on that point, Thomas.
Yeah.
It's undeniable that there are other people interested in Everton Football Club and are talking to the club. How that works in terms of exclusivity, well, somebody in Fahad Moshiri's office needs to answer that one. But there are other people looking at Everton and having conversations about buying Everton. They may not be as advanced as Peter Kenyon's group because of the exclusivity, but nevertheless, it's happening. Sorry, I could have crossed you.
Yeah, no, absolutely no problem. I think it kind of just draws me to my last couple of questions, and this is much more fan related, really. I don't want to sit and talk about transfers for too long, but I think it is important to kind of talk about the immediate impact a potential sale will have on the club. Of course, we are in a transfer window. I think it's open. I've got no idea. I don't really pay that much attention to it these days. But look, people talk about a lot about profitability and sustainability. We know the club's struggling on that front. We want to sign players as fans. It's natural. We want to see exciting players, big money signings come in. Not necessarily sure that'll kind of happen instantly, but it kind of leads to a general question. If this takeover is as serious as it sounds, and it definitely sounds like it is, how long do you think this will kind of take, and what effect do you think that'll have on the immediate future of the club?
I don't know how long it's going to take. And one thing that Peter Kenyon said, I think on Friday, so 24 hours ago or thereabouts, was that the exclusivity period had a fair amount of time to run. So that suggests that a takeover is not imminent. That, we're in the early stages of it. Does that mean that we're going to finish the takeover before the end of the transfer window at the end of August? Who knows? But if it doesn't happen before the end of August, it makes what transfer business Everton can do extremely difficult, because Moshiri is not going to fund anything because he knows that he's going to sell the club, or he's hoping to sell the club. And quite possibly the incoming investors are going to say, well, actually, we don't want you to spend anything without our approval in the first instance. And obviously, if you're not an owner, you can't give the approval. So there's that. And then there's also the issue about profitability and sustainability, and the amount of cash that Everton Football Club have. Both of those suggest that it's very difficult for Everton to do transfer business without selling a player, or more than one player. So if it's DCL, or if it's Richarlison, or if it's DCL and Richarlison, any of those three things have to happen in order for us to be able to buy a player, or to buy significantly, to regenerate the squad. Partly because of we don't have a huge amount of money in the club at this moment in time, because most of that money is obviously going towards the stadium. Partly because of sustainability and profitability, and partly because if there is a takeover in place, then for the reasons I've just given, it puts a clamp on big expenditure. But without doubt, we have to sell one of DCL or Richarlison, or possibly both, depending upon what price we get for them, in order to make significant changes in the squad this season. If we don't do that, or if we only sell one, and if we don't sell them necessarily for the price that we want, then we're very much back to, loans or low value players. That doesn't mean necessarily that they're going to be bad players. It just means that we're not going to spend a huge amount of money. We're going to have to, sort of scrape around the bottom of the barrel, where we may find a few nuggets, but that's probably not where Everton want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So that pretty much brings me to the end of the questions. I mean, that was very insightful. Thank you for someone. I mean, I've been paying attention roughly to the rumours, but I haven't looked at them too much, because I don't want to get ahead of myself too much. So we'll see how it goes, because I'm sure, like me, like many others, still on the fence about, we don't know where this takeover might lead. We don't know kind of the ramifications of it. But your insight, Paul, as ever, is very helpful. And everybody, if you haven't already seen Paul on Twitter, once again, where have you been? As you can imagine, takeover season, Everton Football Club. Paul is in his absolute element on Twitter. Some great articles, some great podcasts coming out at the moment. So definitely check them out. Paul, as always, been a massive privilege. Thank you for coming on.
Cheers, mate, and apologies to everybody if you're tired of hearing my voice.
I'm sure that's absolutely not the case. But thank you all very much for watching, and join us next time on the Toffee Blues. Goodbye.